In 1901, a mysterious triangle of land at Manhattan's heart skyrocketed in value. Its origins, tangled in Tammany Hall's political machine and backroom deals. This was not just the foundation for a bizarre tower. Critics mocked the very idea, expecting collapse and scandal before the Flatiron even rose. How did America's most controversial skyscraper start as a playground for urban corruption? And why did its shadow haunt everyone who touched it? The answer begins with the land itself. Broadway's diagonal cut through Manhattan did more than disrupt the city's grid. It carved out a sharp triangle of land at 23rd Street and 5th Avenue, a leftover wedge that seemed almost unusable, hemmed in by traffic and odd angles. Yet by the late 1800s, this strange parcel sat at the heart of the Tenderloin, a district notorious for vice, nightlife, and political protection. Tammany Hall, the city's dominant political machine, counted this neighborhood among its strongholds. Decisions about streets and property rarely happened without their say-so. In public records, the Board of Aldermen debated street widenings and improvements in the Madison Square area. Each adjustment to Broadway or Fifth Avenue meant new boundaries, new slices of land, and new opportunities for those with the right connections. The triangle's value did not come from its shape alone. It was a product of city government's power to redraw maps, often benefiting insiders. Tammany-backed aldermen routinely sat on committees that approved these changes, and the Tenderloin precinct's reputation for corruption was well known. Police protection and political favors greased the wheels of real estate deals, especially where entertainment and nightlife crowded the streets. By the 1880s, Amos Eno owned the Triangle, building the Cumberland Hotel and renting the North Wall for news projections and advertising. The site's visibility gave it a unique draw, but its real worth was still shaped by politics. When Eno died in 1899, his estate put the parcel up for auction. Around the same time, the New York State Assembly moved to appropriate $3 million to buy the lot. A sum so high that reformers accused Tammany boss Richard Croker of orchestrating a graft scheme. The state's purchase never closed, but the episode left a paper trail of backroom negotiations and public outrage. Within weeks, Eno's son William bought the property from the estate for $690,000, only to resell it to the Newhouse brothers for $801,000. 2 years later, the Fuller Company paid about $2 million for the land, setting the stage for an unprecedented tower. The Triangle's journey from awkward wedge to prime real estate was no accident of geography. It reflected decades of street plans, political leverage, and a climate where public sector decisions could turn forgotten corners into windfalls for the well-connected. The Flatiron's foundations were laid not just in bedrock, but in the city's long tradition of machine politics and street-level profit. In the closing years of the 19th century, the Flatiron Triangle became the stage for one of Manhattan's most aggressive land games. When Amos Eno's estate put the property up for sale in 1899, the auction drew more than just curious onlookers. The parcel's reputation, visible, lucrative, and tangled in city politics, meant every move was watched by speculators and reformers alike. The state legislature's failed $3 million appropriation had already inflated expectations, even as whispers of insider dealing swirled around Tammany Hall. But the real action happened in the deed books and probate files, where numbers told their own story. William Phelps Eno, acting as executor for his father's estate, stepped forward at the auction and bought the Triangle for $690,000. The ink was barely dry before his name appeared again in the conveyance records. Within weeks, the deed transferred from William Eno to the Newhouse brothers, Samuel and Mott, for $801,000. That $111,000 jump, in under a month, was not lost on anyone studying the ledgers. The Newhouses, Western mining magnates with a taste for New York real estate, saw the Triangle not as a final destination, but as a quick step in a longer chain. Their holding period was short by design, a speculative pause before the next, bigger flip. 2 years later, the Fuller Company, led by Harry S. Black, entered the scene. Black's ambitions for a new kind of office tower required a site with both prestige and spectacle. The new houses named their price, roughly $2 million, more than double what they had paid in 1899. The records show a clean line: Eno Estate to Eno Heir to New House Syndicate to Fuller Syndicate, each transaction stacking another layer of value on the same sliver of land. The triangle's price had nearly tripled in less than 30 months, with each owner pocketing a windfall. Probate schedules and deed books from this period read like a speculative fever chart, with the triangle's value rising far faster than any improvements on the ground. None of these buyers planned to hold the land for long. The Eno family's quick profit fit the era's pattern of estate liquidation, but the new house's brief ownership revealed a sharper edge, an understanding that in Manhattan, the right parcel could be sold not just for what it was, but for what it might become in the hands of the next optimist. For Harry Black and the Fuller Company, that optimism would soon take the form of a steel-framed tower, a move that only made sense in a market where land values could leap by hundreds of thousands in a single deal. By the time construction began, the triangle had gone from an awkward leftover to the most expensive undeveloped plot in the city, its value driven as much by paper speculation as by bricks and mortar. The feverish flips and escalating sums set the stakes for everything that followed, justifying risks that would have seemed unthinkable a decade earlier. When the Flatiron building opened its doors in 1902, New York newspapers wasted no time sharpening their knives. The New York Tribune, in a line that would echo through history, dismissed the new tower as a measly piece of cake. Other headlines called it a freak, a folly, a monstrous wedge. Editorial cartoons splashed across the city broadsheets turned the Flatiron's sharp prow into a joke, sometimes a ship about to sink, sometimes a slice of pie teetering on the edge of collapse. The press did not just question the building's looks, they mocked its very right to exist. Columnists speculated that the 22-story steel frame would topple in the first serious windstorm, flattening Broadway and Fifth Avenue in a single spectacular disaster. The ridicule was not limited to architecture critics. Cartoonists drew Burnham, the architect, as a madman gambling with the city's safety. The phrase Burnham's folly began to circulate, painting the project as a reckless experiment in steel and hubris. One cartoon in the Evening World depicted nervous pedestrians scurrying past the looming triangle, umbrellas turned inside out, hats flying, with the caption, "Will it stand or will it slice?" This was a city used to spectacle, but the Flatiron's geometry made it an irresistible target. At its narrowest, the building measured just 6 feet from wall to wall, a number that appeared in headlines as proof of absurdity. Papers ran side-by-side illustrations comparing the Flatiron to slices of cake, wedges of cheese, even a doorstop. The architectural press, usually more reserved, joined in. The Real Estate Record and Guide called it an experiment in vertical ambition, while the Tribune's measly piece of cake line became shorthand for every joke about the building's odd proportions. The power of the press in 1902 was absolute. A single headline could shape public opinion, and the Flatiron's arrival gave editors a perfect canvas for mockery. Letters to the editor poured in, some demanding the city tear down the eyesore, others marveling at its audacity. The ridicule was loud enough to drown out the voices of supporters, at least for a while, but the more the newspapers piled on, the more curious crowds gathered at 23rd and Broadway. The Flatiron became a punchline, yes, but also an instant landmark, a place where the city's anxieties about change, technology, and modern life played out in real time. The press had set the terms of the debate. Was this a marvel of progress or a disaster waiting to happen? For weeks, The answer depended on which paper you read and how loudly the headlines shouted their verdict. Wind at the Flatiron corner did more than rattle nerves. It whipped the city into a spectacle. The building's prow, meeting Broadway and Fifth Avenue at a knife edge, funneled air so forcefully that passers-by gripped their hats and skirts every time they crossed 23rd Street. Newspapers quickly dubbed it the Flatiron Breeze. In winter, gusts could sting the face with grit and cinders. In spring, they sent hats tumbling and newspapers swirling above the trolley tracks. Women in long skirts braced themselves, clutching fabric to their ankles as the wind threatened to expose them to the crowd. Word spread quickly. By noon, clusters of men, clerks, delivery boys, even out-of-towners, gathered at the triangle's point, hoping for a glimpse of ankles or a sudden swirl of petticoats. The city's moral guardians saw trouble in this new ritual. Police officers assigned to the corner paced the sidewalk and eyed the crowd. Some patrolmen barked at loiterers to move along, and the phrase 23 Sky Do began to circulate. It meant simply scram, and New Yorkers started using it everywhere, but the Flatiron corner gave the slang a home. The origins of 23 Ski Do are tangled in legend. Some said it came from the intersection's address, others from vaudeville, but the story that police used it to chase away skirt watchers stuck. The press ran with it, printing stories of officers shooing men from the curb, and soon the phrase was a citywide joke. The wind itself became a character in the city's drama. Reporters described sudden gusts strong enough to lift umbrellas and send street vendors' carts rolling. A few columns speculated, half in jest and half in warning, that the Flatiron Breeze could knock a person off their feet or even cause a serious accident. Stories circulated about a cyclist blown into traffic, though no official record ever confirmed such a fatality. The danger was real enough to keep the New York Police Department on alert and the public wary. Every day, the corner churned with energy, skirts snapping, hats flying, police whistles cutting through the roar of traffic. The building's sharp geometry turned wind into a citywide event, drawing crowds and moral panic in equal measure. For engineers and officials, the spectacle raised a new question: was this just urban folklore, or a sign that the Flatiron's design had created a hazard no one had foreseen? The drama on the street was impossible to ignore, and the city's gaze lingered on the wedge-shaped tower, wondering what else it might unleash. Steel arrived at the Flatiron site in the spring of 1901, delivered by rail and hoisted skyward by teams working with military precision. Daniel Burnham's vision called for a building that looked impossibly thin from the street, but the real test fell to Corydon Purdy, the structural engineer whose calculations would decide whether the tower would stand or fall. Purdy's solution was radical for its time. He designed a steel skeleton braced with a system of diagonals, known as K-bracing, hidden behind the limestone and terracotta skin. These diagonal steel members crisscrossed the frame, transferring wind loads from the narrow prow at 23rd Street all the way back to the solid spine along Fifth Avenue. The plans called for the bracing to be so robust that the building could withstand 4 times the strongest wind ever recorded in Manhattan. Foundation crews dug down nearly 35 feet, anchoring the columns into the bedrock of Manhattan's schist. Each steel column was set on a grillage of iron beams, distributing the weight across the stone below. This foundation method, common in Chicago but still new to New York, allowed the Flatiron to rise quickly and confidently, even as doubters watched from the sidewalks. The steel frame itself was fabricated by the American Bridge Company, shipped in sections marked with assembly codes, and riveted together on site. The entire skeleton rose at a pace of a floor per week, with the bracing installed floor by floor, knitting the structure into a single wind-resistant unit. Contemporary engineering journals tracked the construction closely, publishing diagrams of Purdy's bracing and foundation details. Critics who predicted collapse were forced to reckon with the math. The building's frame alone could resist hurricane-force gusts, and the deep anchorage made overturning all but impossible. The city's Department of Buildings reviewed the plans and issued permits without demanding special exemptions. Burnham and Purdy, in their correspondence, expressed quiet confidence that the structure would silence its critics once the last rivet was set. As the final floors topped out in early 1902, the Flatiron's silhouette cut a sharp line against the sky. For all the jokes about its narrow tip, just 6 feet across at the prow, the building's stability was never truly in doubt. The K-bracing, foundation depth, and steel connections transformed what looked like a precarious wedge into one of the most overbuilt towers in the city's history. In the years that followed, storms battered Manhattan, but the Flatiron stood firm, unmoved by the gales that once fueled headlines and gossip. The numbers had won out over the rumors, and the so-called folly became a lasting fact of the skyline. Blueprints for the Flatiron building, drawn up in 1901, mapped out every inch of the tower's narrow wedge. Plumbing risers snaked upward, connecting a line of lavatories on each floor. But for all their technical precision, the plans revealed a silent omission. There were no restrooms for women anywhere in the building. Every washroom, every labeled water closet, was designated for men, an architectural blind spot baked into the steel and stone. This was not an accident of drafting. In 1902, the office tower was built for a workforce imagined as exclusively male. The Fuller Company, like most of its peers, filled its offices with male clerks, managers, and engineers. The culture of the time treated women in business as outliers, their presence in the workplace a novelty or a problem to be solved after the fact. Even as women began to enter clerical work in growing numbers, the building's original design left them out of the infrastructure entirely. Tenant directories from the first years list only a handful of female staffers, their names buried among dozens of men. For these early pioneers, anonymous typists, bookkeepers, or stenographers, the daily reality was awkward and humiliating. Without a single dedicated ladies' room, women were forced to navigate a patchwork of solutions. Some borrowed keys to restrooms in neighboring buildings. Others waited for a sympathetic porter to guard the door while they used a men's facility. A few companies with female staff negotiated for access to private washrooms, but these were exceptions, not the rule. Memo exchanges between tenants and building management, preserved in company files, show mounting frustration as the years passed. By 1907, complaints from female clerks and their supervisors spurred a small but telling retrofit: the addition of women's lavatories, but only on alternating floors. Even then, these spaces were often cramped, tucked into corners never meant for them, and poorly signed. The alternating floors solution forced women to plan their day around restroom access, a logistical headache that men never had to consider. The absence of women's restrooms in the original Flatiron was more than a quirk of old plumbing. It was a reflection of the era's office culture, a world built, quite literally, for men. The design flaw lingered as a daily embarrassment for women who worked there. A reminder that progress in steel and engineering could still leave basic human needs unmet. Only as the decades wore on and women's presence in the workplace became undeniable did building codes and renovation plans catch up. But for the first generation of women at the Flatiron, the message was clear: you were an afterthought, if you were considered at all. Harry Stuyvesant Black once stood at the center of Manhattan's most ambitious building project, commanding the resources of the Fuller Company and betting his reputation on the Flatiron's success. By the late 1920s, that confidence had faded into a tangle of debts and mounting pressure. Black's name appeared less frequently in the business columns and more often in court filings. The Fuller Company, once an industry leader, struggled with overextended ventures and falling revenues. Auction records from 1925 show the Flatiron changing hands for a fraction of its original cost, a public sign of the company's retreat from its iconic investment. Financial strain followed Black into his private life. Receivership documents list unpaid loans and personal guarantees tied to speculative deals that soured with the broader economy. The Wall Street crash of 1929 only deepened the crisis. 6 days before the market collapsed, Black was discovered nearly drowned in a bathtub at the Plaza Hotel, an incident quietly noted in the press, but heavy with unspoken meaning. Over the next year, Black withdrew to his estate in Huntington, Long Island, as creditors circled and former colleagues distanced themselves. Newspaper obituaries from July 26, 1930, report that Black was found dead in his study, a .38 caliber revolver nearby. The coroner ruled suicide. He was 65 years old. Contemporaries described his final months as marked by isolation and anxiety, burdened by the collapse not only of a company, but of a vision that once seemed unstoppable. Black's story is more than a cautionary tale about risk and ambition. His downfall threads together the personal cost of speculative real estate, the relentless demands of public expectation, and the vulnerability of even the most celebrated builders. The Flatiron, for all its resilience, could not shield its creator from the cycles of boom and bust that shaped New York's skyline and the lives of those who tried to master it. In 1966, the Flatiron Building received official recognition as a New York City landmark. The Landmarks Preservation Commission described its steel frame and terracotta skin as irreplaceable, freezing the exterior in place and setting strict limits on any visible change. Later, national registers echoed the designation, adding layers of protection meant to guard against demolition or insensitive remodeling. But preservation, for all its symbolic weight, did not guarantee the building's survival as a thriving part of city life. Inside, the mechanical systems aged, elevators stalled, and the windows rattled with every passing decade. Tenants cycled through, some staying for generations, others relocating as the cost of maintaining a century-old shell grew steeper each year. By 2019, the last full building tenant moved out, leaving 22 stories empty from tip to base. The Department of Buildings evaluated the facade under Local Law 11 and flagged it as unsafe. Inspectors noted cracked terracotta, loose masonry, and water infiltration, hazards that could send debris tumbling to the sidewalk below. The building's owners wrapped the entire tower in black netting and scaffolding, a move required by city code to protect pedestrians from falling fragments. What had once been a symbol of urban energy now stood as a ghostly silhouette, its famous profile hidden behind mesh for years on end. Landmark status meant every repair, every window replacement, and every patch of terracotta required commission review and approval. The process slowed restoration, increased costs, and made it nearly impossible to adapt the building for modern office tenants. Developers and preservationists debated the balance between authenticity and usability. But the building itself sat silent, its offices dark, and its lobby echoing with the sounds of construction that never seemed to finish. The protections that had saved the Flatiron from the wrecking ball now left it stranded, a landmark in name but a shell in practice. When the building went to auction, bidders inherited not just a celebrated address but a set of legal and physical constraints that would shape every decision to come. On a cold morning in March 2023, a small crowd gathered on the steps of the New York County Courthouse for a public auction that promised to settle the fate of the Flatiron Building. The city's most recognizable wedge of steel and stone, empty for years, was now up for grabs by court order, after its owners deadlocked over repairs and leasing. Among the expected bidders stood Jacob Garlick, a venture capitalist from Virginia with little track record in Manhattan real estate. When the auctioneer called for offers, Garlick stunned everyone by outbidding the seasoned property moguls. His final bid was $190 million, nearly $30 million above the next highest offer. Under the auction's strict terms, Garlick was supposed to wire a 10% deposit, about $19 million, within days. But the money never arrived. As the deadline passed, courthouse staff waited for a transfer that did not come. Co-owner Jeffrey Gurl, a veteran of New York's real estate scene, told reporters he had never heard from Garlick after the gavel fell. Legal filings later described Garlick's bid as a play for headlines, not a serious purchase. The court-appointed referee filed a report documenting the default. The sellers promptly sued Garlick, seeking the missing deposit and damages for the failed sale. Their complaint argued he had disrupted a public process and left the building in limbo, all for what they called his 15 minutes of fame. The fallout was immediate. The auction was declared void, and the building's owners faced another round of uncertainty. The legal wrangling over the deposit moved through the courts, with the referee's report and the lawsuit entering the public record. The Flatiron, already wrapped in black mesh and scaffolding, now wore a new layer of scandal. The vanished $190 million bid became a cautionary tale about the risks of high-profile auctions and the volatility of landmark real estate. For months, the building's future hung on legal briefs and court calendars, its fate as unsettled as the day Garlick's check failed to clear. Construction crews working inside the Flatiron in early 2024 stumbled onto something long forgotten, a series of terraces tucked behind walls and hidden above old service corridors. These spaces, some barely marked on original blueprints, had been overlooked for decades, relegated to maintenance access, or sealed off as inefficiencies in the office era. Now, with the building's future in question, and the scaffolding still clinging to its skin, these terraces offered a rare opportunity. The project architect described them as found rooms in a puzzle, each with a slice of skyline once reserved for janitors or pigeons, now reimagined as private outdoor lounges for future residents. The discovery arrived just as the new ownership consortium finalized its $161 million plan to convert the Flatiron into luxury condominiums. Department of Buildings Alteration permits filed under Alt 1 in early 2024 detailed a sweeping rehabilitation, gutting the obsolete office floors, restoring the landmarked facade, and carving out about 40 residential units from the steel and stone wedge. The terraces, once dismissed as unusable, were quickly folded into the condo layouts, pitched in marketing materials as exclusive amenities with panoramic views over Madison Square and the city beyond. Landmarks Preservation Commission conditions dictated that any changes to the exterior must preserve the building's historic profile, so architects worked within strict boundaries. Railings were designed to be nearly invisible from the street. New doors would open onto the terraces from select units, but the old terracotta parapets and cornices had to remain untouched. Every alteration required a public hearing and a signed-off plan, adding months to the timeline and hundreds of pages to the project file. Developers argued that the conversion would breathe life back into an empty shell, promising a blend of preservation and reinvention. But with the Flatiron's transformation into a private enclave, questions lingered about access and ownership. The same icon that once drew crowds to its windy corner would soon be mostly off-limits, its best views reserved for a handful of buyers. For the city, the $161 million rehabilitation represented both a rescue and a retreat, a landmark saved but also sequestered, its public legacy reframed behind glass and keycards. The Flatiron stands empty behind scaffolding, as New York's real estate battles and luxury conversions erase public history in plain sight. Its future now belongs to developers, not the city. As forgotten secrets surface, like hidden terraces and lost stories, the building reminds us the truth. Every landmark is a battleground between memory and profit. The city's identity hangs in the balance. What part of our past will we allow to vanish next? Share your thoughts below.